Hello, I'm Imara Jones here at the Bioneers conference as a special correspondent for FSTV to talk about how that movement, the Bioneers movement, can help to heal ourselves and our planet as well as our nation at this really critical time, as well as to promote social justice. And so that's why we're really happy today to be joined by Mohammad Khan, who is the campaign director for Mpower Change, an online digital community of Muslim communities across the United States who come together to make their voice heard. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So one of the interesting things is that Bioneers is a conference that focuses on biology and on the environment and on the intelligence of the environment to help instruct us on various systems. That's not immediately something that you would identify with in terms of promoting ethnic fairness or religious tolerance or necessarily even social justice specifically, although that's part of what happens here. So given that, what's happening here that makes Mpower Change interested?
So I think there's two ways to approach that question. One way is in the Muslim faith and also in the way that Muslim communities operate here in the US, being connected to the environment and to the planet is something that's very important both in our faith and in our practice. And for us as an organization that works on social justice and progressive issues, we always look at being connected to the planet and being connected to the environment as, something that's very important for us. And we also try to expand, as an organization, we try to expand the definition of what Muslim issues are, right? Because there's so many diverse Muslim communities in the United States, and a lot of times we get bogged down in focusing on Islamophobia or, condemning terrorism or condemning policies that impact our community, but really there's so many policies and things to consider outside of that frame that are impacting the lives of everyday Muslims. So whether it's the environment, whether it's economic fairness, whether it's other social justice issues, we try to look at a really broad approach of what issues are impacting Muslim communities around the U.S.
Right, it's like these movements have to be intersectional in order to be successful, right? Because the pressure is coming from so many different sides. So there's not only one community that necessarily is facing a lot of difficulty at this moment. So I guess that's part of the reason.
Yeah, there's like such a broad agenda by the folks in power to really attack and disrupt our communities in so many different ways. So it's very important for us all to come and work together to address that and to build power together.
One of the things that you're here to talk about is diversifying digital. That's what your panel is about. What would you say, this is almost a trick question, you're going to hit this out of the park. What is the state, from your perspective, of diversity in digital? Clearly it's not where it needs to be, but I guess one of the key questions is what can be done about that?
Yeah, well, I think first it starts by recognizing that there is an issue in the tech world, and specifically, we're focused on digital campaigning and digital organizing, and a lot of the organizations that have a lot of power and a lot of resources in the digital organizing space are white-led organizations. But if you look at the issues that folks are fighting against, a lot of times it's communities of color, people of color, who are directly impacted by those issues. So we feel it's very important for those people to also be leading these movements, to be leading these organizations, to have the power and the resources to push back against the issues that are impacting them.
Part of the problem, of course, is recognizing that there is an issue. But what are some of the structural things that can be done to make sure that there are enough Muslim voices that are in tech and that technology is fairer for everybody?
I think it really comes down to empowering people of color and communities of color to take charge of these issues and not just be present in these spaces, but also be in these spaces in positions of leadership and positions of power where they can actually make change and not just be, not just to have a seat at the table, but also to decide what's talked about at the table, to, be able to have resources given to you to be able to carry out, strategies and ways to build power for communities of color.
Right, and for actually, in part for these to actually be seen as valuable communities, I would imagine, inside of tech and technology. So what's a specific strategy around diversifying tech that you think is effective? So it seems as if, in part, one of your strategies is to place awareness inside of these companies that they need to hire people, they need to empower them, they need to have value. So, but in addition, are there other strategies that you think are effective or that you would recommend?
Yeah, so in 2016, I was very proud to be part of the Kairos Fellowship Program, which is a program designed specifically to create a pipeline of digital campaigners of color. So, recruiting people of color who are interested in digital campaigning, and then really building a program around that to give them leadership training, to give them programmatic skills so they can be effective digital campaigners, and then placing them in organizations that, recognize that they have issues around diversity and equity, and having them placed in these organizations as a way to not only develop their own skills, but to develop the organization's ways of thinking and approaching digital campaigning.
What is the power of digital in helping to give Muslim communities across the United States a voice?
Yeah, so my organization, Mpower Change, is the first ever online organizing platform for Muslim communities, and we saw that within the digital campaigning space, there was a lack of a Muslim voice. There are a lot of organizations, great Muslim-led organizations out there that focus on civil rights, that focus on advocacy and on legal challenges and civil rights issues. But there was no online rapid response, digitally native organization that existed in the ecosystem, and that's why we saw a real need for an organization like Mpower Change. So when issues happen impacting Muslim communities, there is often a lot of sentiment out there, but there isn't a way for that sentiment to reach people in power. And one of the great things about digital is that you can quickly, consolidate what a lot of people are feeling and put it on, an online petition or a social media action and get the attention of people in power in a way that is very difficult to do when that sentiment is, distributed in a way and not being collected online.
I would imagine as well, because Muslims are everywhere, that one of the things that it also helps to do is to break up the sense of isolation that people, if you're Muslim in Fargo, North Dakota or someplace, the fact is that, this is a way for you to connect with other Muslims and to join up. And for people to be made aware that you exist in those spaces, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the been one of the most inspiring things about working at Mpower Change over the last 2 years is, having people, like you said, who live in isolated communities, really recognizing that there is a broader national movement that they can be a part of. So, getting calls, like you said, from people in South Dakota saying, hey, this is an issue that's impacting my community. I've seen how you've done it in other communities. Let's work together to address it. And that's been one of the most powerful things about having this online platform is the way it can connect people across the country.
As campaign director, what are some of the campaigns that you think are the most important in terms of what you guys are undertaking?
Yeah, so this year and last year, because of the election, unfortunately, we've been having to do a lot of rapid response work, just responding to the white nationalist agenda of this administration, whether it's, the Muslim ban or the repeal of DACA or doubling down on abusive policing and violence against black communities. There's been a lot of just responsiveness, sort of reactive sort of work that we've had to do. I think long term, our organizing vision is just to build organizing capacity in Muslim communities, both locally and nationally, so that, while we're on the one hand responding to these issues, we're also proactively building power. And I think it goes beyond just addressing what's coming from the government, but we also need to look at the media and the way the media portrays Muslims and Muslim communities, not just in the news media, but also on TV shows and in movies. We need to look at corporations and how they're, on one hand speaking out against a certain agenda, but at the same time, financing private prisons, financing immigration detention centers, really kind of speaking out of both sides of their mouth, like when condemning white nationalist rhetoric, but then also at the same time participating in a white nationalist agenda.
Is that one of the biggest threats that you see rising, is the white nationalist agenda?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's pretty clear that this administration is a white nationalist administration. You can see that by, who's advising Donald Trump, the people that he's hired, the people that he speaks to, his affiliation with hate groups, anti-Muslim hate groups, anti-LGBT hate groups. I think for this administration, we've seen the policies that the president seems to be most interested in are policies that exclude people of color and people who aren't Christian from civic and public life in this country, and in the case of Muslims, straight up excluding us from the country altogether, right? So I don't think they're there's much doubt that this administration has a white nationalist agenda.
What do you feel is, we know that there are multiple threats to the Muslim community just now, from violence and also policy pressure in the Muslim ban and others. I'm wondering where you feel we are in the life cycle of that. That is to say, are we still in the middle of things continuing to unfold, or you pretty much believe that everything that's happened now is pretty much it and there's going to be a pushback or a response? Or where do you feel we're in the life cycle? Are we at the beginning, the middle, or the end?
That's a tough question. I think we're definitely in the middle of it. I mean, these policies have been impacting Muslim communities for the past 2 decades since September 11, and even before that, there was a lot of stigmatization and victimization of, Arabs, South Asians, Muslims. Obviously, Black Muslims have a longer history than that even. But I think the difference is, in previous administrations, it was done in more subtle ways. It was done with, coded language in the framework of national security. In this administration, we've just seen blatant bigotry and Islamophobia and anti-Muslim sentiment, and I think that has impacted, that's changed the circumstances in a major way, because we hear from the top down we hear a message from the top down that anti-Muslim bigotry is okay.
Right.
Not only is it okay, but it's something that is patriotic, is something that defines the character of this country, is to be anti-Muslim. And that's affected Muslim communities not only at policy level, but also we've seen a huge spike in hate crimes and hate violence targeting Muslim communities and people who are perceived to be Muslim, right? South Asian folks, Arab folks who are non-Muslim but are perceived to be Muslim are also being impacted by this. So I think we are definitely in the middle of the life cycle of anti-Muslim bigotry. I do feel some hope that because the anti-Muslim bigotry now is so blatant and so at the forefront, there's a lot of allies and non-Muslim folks who are clearly recognizing that this is wrong. This is not something that this is not a place we want to be at as a country and as a community. So I think we've seen a lot of support from allies coming out to the airports after the Muslim ban protests, right? We did a rally in Washington, D.C. this past Wednesday as the 3rd iteration of the Muslim ban went into effect, and we had over 3,000 people, a mix of Muslims and allies, come out to say that, this is wrong. So I'm hopeful that because the bigotry is so blatant now, there's more counter sentiment to that and people realizing that it's wrong and taking a stand against it.
Great. What for you in this moment is the hope? I mean, at a time, if we're in the middle, that means we still have a ways to go. We're not close to the end. And as you say, one of the issues here is that it's Muslim and anyone perceived to be Muslim that is under attack, which means that the scope is wide and that it's kind of undirected in some respect. So what for you is the hope?
Yeah, for me the hope is intersectionality and solidarity. And, thinking specifically about the issue of people perceived as Muslims, we've seen a lot of members of the Sikh community who wear turbans, who are often misidentified as Muslims, facing violence. And, I think it would be very easy for members of that community to stand up and say, no, like, we're not Muslim, those are the Muslims, those are the bad guys, right? But instead we've seen solidarity in them come out and say, no, like, the root of this issue is anti-Muslim bigotry, and we're going to work alongside Muslim communities to address that instead of sort of trying to deflect the hate and violence that we're feeling towards the Muslim community. And I think other communities are also stepping up, and at the same time, Muslim communities are recognizing that bigotry against us is also related to bigotry against other communities, right? So, the Muslim ban and the transgender military ban are coming from the same playbook of the same administration. And, the repeal of DACA is part of a white nationalist agenda to exclude people of color from this country, the same way the Muslim ban is part of that agenda. So I think that intersectionality and solidarity on both sides is what's really giving me a lot of hope right now.
It's bringing people together in an odd way.
Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned before is that there are lots of different Muslim communities, and I'm wondering how Mpower goes about, given the need for intersectionality and all the rest of it, giving various Muslim communities a voice through that. So LGBTQ Muslims and Muslims who are women, Black Muslims, as you say, that there's tremendous heterogeneity in the community. And so how do you balance the need to speak with one voice with the need to represent all the voices?
Yeah, I think that's an issue that a lot of communities face, right? And the Muslim community is super diverse, and it's not monolithic, and it's very different than a lot of people think, right? African American or Black Muslims are the largest ethnic group. Over approximately a third of all Muslims in the U.S. are Black, right? Latinx Muslims are the fastest growing group.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's recognizing when we're thinking about issues, recognizing what are issues that do cut across those different communities and what are issues that are related to specific communities. So just being really aware of that and not trying to paint the community as a monolith in our work is, I think, very important for us, right? So I think amongst some Muslim communities, for instance, there's a tendency to see the movement for Black Lives as something that we should be in allyship with but doesn't directly impact us, but that sort of erases the huge number of Black Muslims that exist in the U.S. that are also impacted by police violence. When we look at the fight for undocumented immigrants, same thing, there are plenty of undocumented immigrants in Muslim communities, plenty of TPS recipients. So just always keeping that intersectionality in mind and recognizing what are sort of the broad issues and then what are specific issues for different communities. We've also been able to impact the way other Muslim organizations think about intersectionality and think about their space in the movement in this country at this time. And I think really one of the biggest impacts has been in the movement space itself, organizing progressive organizations and Muslim organizations to really think about intersectionality and think about issues.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for the work that Mpower Change does, that you're doing, that everyone there does. It's extremely critical in the moment, and I hope that, and I think we all hope, that the efforts to build an intersectional movement, which is why you're here, continue after the conference and well beyond. So thank you for joining.
Awesome. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for our conversation with Mohammad Khan. Be sure, if you want to find out more about Mpower Change, to visit their website at empowerchange.org. And of course, please visit freespeechtv.org as well. Thank you so much.